Yamaha 60, saltwater version. When you winterize, you have a season and an off year and a main year. Your main year, you'll change your oil. It depends on use though, it could be every year, but usually for most people it's every 2 years. Your water fuel separator filter will usually be remote. It'll be hidden away somewhere. It looks like a regular oil filter on a car, but it's a water fuel separator. And you do your regular battery checks. You'll check if they're serviceable lead acid batteries. You'll check the water levels on them. You put distilled water to top them off. Well, it's not top off. You get about 3/4 inch, ½ inch from the top, but get them even. And you check the specific gravity of each one of those cells. You check their voltage after being charged, after about sitting for an hour or more, after taking them off the charger, to see where they level out to. And you gotta use the proper charger, if whatever type of battery you have, whether it's glass mat, gel, L-ion, or the lead acid. So, and you'll check your bilge pump, make sure everything's clear of that, it's operating properly. Especially if you have to store it on water or anywhere near water, where it sits in water, or rain. If you get a lot of rain, you can be out of the water, you still want that bilge pump working. You don't want your fiberglass soaked all the way up inside and this thing to fill up like a swimming pool. You damage your electronics and all kinds of stuff and your motor. One of the things is, these things you have to also maintain the rigid inflatables for leaks. You have to be patched and taken care of. Try to keep them covered away from the elements. Sun, weather will deteriorate these in a couple of years and it'll look terrible. I mean, they will just fall apart. And I'm going to be working on a project on an X-Tender designed by Brian Hawley, which looks like a rigid inflatable, but it's actually a closed cell foam. And these pontoons all the way around, and it won't sink, and it doesn't degrade. They look beautiful 15 years later. He has one he made over 15 years ago. It looks beautiful, but he made it on carbon fiber. I'll be using basalt fiber, which doesn't conduct electricity. Back to the boat though. So your fuel primer here, right here, prime your fuel. Sometimes people will do their PM or their winterization, summerization, and because they're moving around stuff, they'll move around this ball. They don't know. Inside here is a check valve ball that travels from one end to the other. If this lays down like this, or this, like this sideways, or this way, or whatever, it has to sort of sit like this for it to properly work. That check ball work, because if it doesn't close, it's not going to work. If it's open and the fuel can travel both directions, it's not going to prime this properly and it's not going to start right. So after you've done your initial start for the day, any time of the day you start it up again, it should be just push, turn, and start right up in neutral. You gotta remember, if you're having a problem not starting, make sure you're in neutral, because no boat motor will start if it's not neutral. And they'll have so many people have sat there crank, and their boats ain't in neutral, or they have a bad adjustment on a neutral safety switch, and they're just tearing up their starter. Another thing you know on these outboards especially, and any other boat motor with a starter, electric starter, is you never get grease on the gear. Never get grease on the pinion here, because it'll ruin it. It'll immediately ruin that starter. People are like, well, how's that grease? Believe me, the grease will ruin that starter. The only thing you can use to lubricate this part of a starter is called dry silicone spray. And you have your power off. You make sure your power's off when you use it, and you're going to let it dry all the way before you put the power back on. Okay? So another thing is, right here you have your solenoid next to the starter. So if you ever break down and you think you're dead in the water because you have a bad starter, is you can jump from this wire to this wire and just touch and start with your key in the on position, and then you can start your engine without that solenoid, because the solenoid would be the first thing usually burn out. Okay. So one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to check, because I'm not changing the oil, I'm still going to check my oil level. I'll probably want to have it perfectly level. I go out there and I have nothing to wipe this on. Fingers in my pants. Terrible hand. Such a spot. Okay, so I got a clean dipstick all the way up. And I put that dipstick, make sure it goes all the way in. Alright, we're going to look at the quality of the oil, whether it's burnt and whether it's the proper fill. And you'll see there's nothing that says full, but you have these hash marks here, crisscross hash marks. You should go just to the very top of them. This one goes to maybe an 1/8 inch or more, but if you went like all the way to here, that could be almost a quart, and that's way over full. And what happens when you overfill any engine with oil is you can bend your piston rods and cause severe damage. Okay. So never overfill, and add whatever you need for additional oil, but you see it's nice and clear. And in the light, whatever light, if you have to use a flashlight or whatever, you got good sun, you're looking for any metallic sparkles in that. Because you got clean oil, and you can still see metallic sparkles, you have something going on with that motor, and you need to see a real mechanic. Okay, so our oil's good, clean everything. And later on we'll be checking the gear oil, and we'll be checking, remove the prop, and we're going to check for any fishing line, especially Kevlar line, stuff like that for fishing. It's really strong stuff, and you don't want it tearing up the little seal between your prop and your lower unit, because you get water in your lower unit and you don't know, and you run it all year like that, you're going to ruin your lower unit. Every 2 years on all outboards and all inboards, you change your impeller. Okay? Now, if you didn't use the boat, people say, well, you don't do it. Well, maybe if you have a silicone impeller, but if you have a standard impeller, you're going to do it every 2 years, because you don't want that impeller from age to get memory. And the housing around it when you put it in is actually bending the vanes on the impeller vanes. Those are the little things that stick out. They are bent against the housing, and it just sits there in that one position. So all these vanes on one side get memory, and they get stuck that way, and it won't properly pump. You may see water flowing. It may be pissing really good, but this has a flow rate and a pressure rate that has to be met to give proper cooling to this motor. And if it doesn't meet it, even though it looks like it, it's going to overheat, and when you're out on the water flying, making all that noise, some motors don't even make alarm noises. You know, they fail or they don't have one because of one reason or another. They should, but and you got an impeller like that, you can burn up an engine and just look around, look behind you, and all of a sudden you notice it's smoking. Steaming is actually what it is. Overheating, you'll have cracked heads, cracked block, all kinds of stuff you can have happen. The change in the pistons and cylinders cause tremendous wear, burnt rings. Rings can get pulled out and just tear up the inside of the cylinders. All kinds of bad stuff. Okay, and then let's see here. These are the coils here, and we got our spark plugs here. We're going to pull them, and we're going to inspect them, and then we're going to fog inside our cylinders, and then we'll put them back in. I don't really use any anti-seize on spark plugs, as long as the motor isn't one that's having a lot of electrolysis problems. Like if I open this up and there's galling and corrosion all over the white powdery stuff the aluminum gets, then I'd probably use anti-seize on it. But since this engine looks in really good shape, it's been well maintained, I won't do that. But one thing I will do is I'll check my block zincs, and the other zincs on the lower unit you can visually inspect. The ones on the boat you can visually inspect for the mount of the hardware. But these ones, the internal ones, you have to actually pull them to inspect them. and there's like 2 sections of the water block that have their internal zincs. And everything on this motor, pretty much, most everything on the motor you're going to do are going to be 10, 12, and 14 millimeter on Yamahas. So, now whether it's a Merc Cruiser, Yamaha, whatever, or some older brand like a Johnson or something, there's not too much difference. All motors are pretty much the same in theory. The only thing over the years that's ever changed really is adding the computer and sensors. I mean, they operate pretty much the same. I'll get this so you can see it. So, I guess 2 years ago. Okay, usually people think it's their steering column that's froze up. Now, to check that, you just take off this nut right here and see if your steering's still hard. If it is, then it is the steering cable. If it isn't, then it's actually this shaft right here, and you have to take the whole block off, everything. It is the whole lower unit, everything apart, the whole block. It's terrible. I had to do that on this one to replace it so you could steer it. It was so hard for him to steer. Right here, this is your thermostat is. And these right here are your internal zincs. I got these 4 here, and then these here. I have 4 more on the other side. Okay, so let's see. And so when you winterize, you want to have your fuel tanks full as possible. You never want to use pump gas ever in a marine engine, unless you like buying marine engines and throwing them away. Pump gas destroys engines, and marine engines you do not want to destroy. They're too expensive. What you do is you get marine gas at your marina, and you put stabilizer in it. Now, one of the stabilizers from Stable is blue, that's the marine one. It's specifically made for boat loaders. People would say, oh, just use the red. You can, but it's not the same. It's not formulated the same process. So please use the blue. And I could make an exception to use the red if you had to store it, say, 18 months instead of 12, the next time you use it. But otherwise, I would stay with the blue, because usually you're going to have your boat out in 12 months. You know, you're going to be on the same old every year when you use it. Careful not to drop your tools in the water. It's going to happen. Okay, so like I was telling you, when you do your oil changes, you're going to do your water fuel separator. There's another fuel filter on this other side towards the back of this engine. You know, a little clear plastic thing you just twist off. Real simple. And you're going to do your gear oil down here every 2 years when you do your impeller. You know, so. The little parts don't want to lose. These things have a little hold down right here. Move that to the side, leave this bolt in, and then you're going to take this other one out. Oh, god dang, no way. It's an 8 millimeter. Oh boy. Well, I'm going to do that at the end and get back to these because I don't want to stop the film. But I was wrong. I forgot 8 millimeter for those internal things. But those are going to change every 2 years. And when you pull them out, if they look totally brand new, you don't change them. If they are crusty, you change them. If they're falling apart, you change them. Now, if they're completely gone, okay, people start digging around and stuff, maybe drop something worse in there, okay? that's going to work its way out, and it's going to degrade more in electrolysis. So don't worry about it. It's going to start breaking itself up. Okay. When you change your oil, you got to be real careful because you're out on the water. You don't want to spill any oil into that water. So you're not going to preload your oil filter, then put it on. You're not going to do that. You can put it on dry. Don't worry about preloading it like you would for some boats and some cars. Instead of clamps, boat motors usually have zip ties instead of clamps. Like you see this one had a zip tie on it, but it's broken off. Been taken off probably when I was working on it and then put it back on. So I'll go get a little zip tie and put it on there while I remember. And right here. Great, I don't have any dikes. I don't carry a knife because I'm clumsy. I'll cut myself every time. So, and that's just how they do it on boats. And you don't use the metal clamps usually on outboards. And I mean, I work on, all the way up to 350 horsepower outboards. They're huge. Dorados, everything. Now, you don't want to ever wash down an outboard with water and still have your battery on. That's a bad thing. All these electronics get damaged. Now, let's say you got a really filthy one. I'm not just talking a thin coat of oil. That's supposed to be there to keep the corrosion from being done. I'm talking lots of dirt. Dirt causes lots of problems. It breaks down rubbers when it's mixed with other petroleum products and stuff. And you get up in your wiring and stuff, start breaking that down. Everything gets corroded, all your contacts and stuff. So what you can do is, before you do the washing, you'll go around, you'll take WD-40 or some other lubricant. They're all the same pretty much. WD means water displacement. That was basically what it is. You can take apart the plug, give it a little shot of WD, or you can take what's called it's a grease. It's for electrical. It's on the tip of my tongue. See, I forget things. But it's non-conductive grease, and it's for electrical. I don't recommend using Vaseline because Vaseline could break down some of the newer components and it could mess with some newer sensors. So using specific grease for electrical is what you want to do. Then once you have all that stuff on, you can take a towel or a plastic bag, shield something, and spray the rest down. And then take a towel and work your way behind stuff like this instead of spraying that. You don't want to spray and soak this stuff. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Water will stay in all the nooks and crannies for a long time. Even on hot days, it don't matter. Think here. Let's see what a plug looks like. Always make sure these are pushed on. If they want to seem like they want to creep off, that means inside here you'll see there's a round metal piece in there deep inside. You have to carefully take some pliers, maybe pinch it. That might help to where it stays on the spark plug when you push it on. Now these spark plugs don't have the round tips on them. These ones have the threaded. So when you push it on, you're not going to get a click. It'll more sound like a grate. Yeah, it's just sliding on there, and these are like friction they held on with because they have the thread, the screw thread, and they have a tiny metal thing inside there that goes to a hole, small hole, that it goes into, and it's sort of just held by friction. Okay, and you'll check your linkage. You don't want it to slam into gear, and you want it to be able to go through, go from neutral to reverse and neutral to forward. Not only smoothly, it may have a little bit of a clunk, but it shouldn't be like BAM, and it shouldn't be jerky. But all those adjustments are right up here, and they're on these cables, and they're deep inside here. And you usually, if you're not getting any gear at all, it may be something different if there's been work done to it. Okay, because these adjustments, I mean, don't usually get far out adjustment. I mean, if it worked fine 1 year and nobody's messed with anything, it shouldn't be losing gear completely. It might clunk too bad or something, but it won't lose gear completely. Usually when it's losing gear completely, is deep inside right here is a shift control arm, and there's usually a part broken on it up here, a small piece of it, or it didn't set right when somebody had the lower unit off, changing the impeller or servicing, gear oil, whatever, or prop. And but they had the lower unit off, and when they put it together, Yamaha's, luckily it goes together really nice, and you don't have to try to get it in the right place. It just goes together right. Mercruisers, very hard to get right. You don't have it, depending on what year and what model and everything, have it in forward or neutral, or for when you do that service, and not change gears while it's off, because it has to hit in the same little thing, that rod that comes down through. And then also the rod can get bent. Somebody forces something when they're working on it, and when they put it back together, and they'll bend that rod sometimes, and it won't shift right. Those are when you have a major shift problem. Let's see here. These cables, if you have to push hard on your shifter where it feels like it's breaking, these cables got to be replaced. One's your throttle and one's your gears. Okay, and let's see, is there anything else here? Okay, so on your carburetors, your multiple carburetors, you should never ever try to adjust them unless you know what you're doing. Because to adjust those carburetors, you don't do them by sound like you would a single carburetor.
Synchrometer.
Okay, they have an air-fuel mixture, then you have an idle. Okay, those, and then you have also a lot of the engines are fuel injected. But you have to use, it has, you hook up little tubes to vacuum, and it'll have little balls in it, and you'll match the vacuum on each one of those in their adjustments by those balls, how high they, floating inside these tubes, each little tube thing, and that's how you do it. It's called synchronizing your carburetors. And it's the same tool you use for like motorcycles, stuff like that. Some hot rods, but most vehicles have a single carb.
Dual Webers.
Yeah, dual carbs I can even do by ear, but 4 carbs, 6 carbs, nah, you're not doing it like that. You gotta use that tool.
Synchrometer.
I'll take care of it. Anything else? Oh yeah, it's good to go through everything, wipe everything down, keep it clean, and then you spray everything except this part of the starter, and you can spray pretty much everything with a lubricant. You want to just do a light mist and electrical stuff and everything, but you don't soak everything, but you just put a light layer, mainly on the metal parts where you're concerned about. And if there is paint that's chipped away and started to gall, that white powdery aluminum, it's good to sand that area, and especially if it's only a small area. The whole motor's done, that motor's probably going to be done, or you just let it go, because it's a lot of work. The small area, just take care of it, clean it up, get all the greases and oils off it, with Dawn, just clean it real good, with the power off, and then put a little shot of paint on that, and protect it and keep it from breaking down, because aluminum can break down quite quick, especially in salt water. And there's saltwater ones and there's freshwater outboards. Then there's ones that do both. But you gotta know that if you run it only on freshwater, you're gonna run a different type of anode than you do for saltwater. Saltwater you use zinc. For freshwater, you're going to use magnesium or aluminum, depending on what type of engine it is and how it was designed by your engineer. So you got to use the right zincs. Those are your sacrificial anodes. They're meant to be eaten up before this metal gets eaten up. Okay. See here. Oh yeah. So right here, this can be greased. There's Zerk fittings. The Zerk fittings, a little nipple. There's Zerk fittings for this part where the steering is. This rod goes in and out. There's a Zerk fitting on this shaft right here, and then sometimes there's a Zerk fitting, I think, right in here. You just gotta look around. It's different on different boats, but there's usually 2 to 3 Zerk fittings for this motor to move around. Let's see here. That's pretty much it. Like I say, I'll pull this motor up to where? Here, I can't really do it, can I? Oh, you see, it's underwater right now. This is the top vent plug for the gear oil. Now, if it was out of the water, I could pull that out and check that my level's right. The only thing I could do here is to loosen it up with the motor up and get a smell of it. Because you can smell in gear oil and look at it when it's burnt, or with the metal fragments in it, or water in it. With water in it, metal fragments in it, you have to service it. You have to have somebody service it. And then you also change the little gasket seal that's on the bolts for the vent and the fill. And the way you fill these is you fill them with a pump that goes onto a regular quart bottle of gear oil, and you pump it in from the bottom until it comes out the top. And when it comes out the top, you put in the top bolt, and when you put that in, that creates a vacuum so you can take the bottom out and not lose a bunch and put the bottom in real quick. Where the prop is, when you remove it to check for that wire, for fishing line and stuff like that, you can inspect the seal. There's a black seal. It's like rubber. It has metal in it, and that keeps the water from going into the gear oil. So your gear oil is good. That seal's probably good, but inspect it anyways. And when those get changed, they're not too hard to change them. All you do is you take there's another one that when you change the impeller, it's underneath the impeller on the shaft here, the main drive shaft that goes up to the engine. The impeller's on that drive shaft, and underneath it, there's another black seal round one. Okay, to change them, you just take a Phillips screw, mainly, usually it's a regular boat stainless steel screw, a little small one about that big, and I screw into it, okay, and then I grab it, and I'll be able to yank that seal out. And when I put it in, I'm going to put a socket that's about that size on top of it. Well, this one you can't because there's a shaft to it. That one sometimes you can. It depends. You got a big enough socket with the right size drive to go over the shaft. You can just tap it in all the way around. You want to enter it in slowly and evenly. You don't want to hit one side all the way in and be cockeyed or damage the seal and have to go buy another one. They're only $10. So it's perfectly fine to change them. Not going to break the bank. Always use OEM parts. An authorized dealer for your motor, okay? Don't go just to anybody and get off-market stuff, especially if it's under warranty, because it may void the warranty. And never buy any kind of aftermarket stuff that's for performance if you're under warranty, because that definitely will void the warranty. Is there anything you can think of, Michael? Do you like to ask?
No, but what you were talking about as far as the carburetor is a synchrometer. Synchrometer. Synchronize the carburetors.
Yeah. It's not a meter, really, because it's just vacuum and bulb.
Yeah, that's...
But gapping your plugs. So, usually they'll say your plugs are pre-gapped. Never listen to that.
No.
Always check the gap. You gotta be careful, especially when you have platinum spark plugs or iridiums. And iridiums are the best.
Where do you gap at?
Huh?
Where do you gap at?
Oh, so on a spark plug, there's a little part that sticks out up. See if we can pull
No,
this
no,
one.
I'm saying 40.
It depends on the motor. Every motor is different.
As far as Yamaha?
Every single motor is different, and
Right.
every spark plug is different. And there are a dozen spark plugs you can put in any motor, and you can get hot ones and cold ones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and but always use the one that is stock. Do not change to a hot plug or a cold plug thinking you're gonna make a hot rod. Okay, never think you're gonna make a motor a hot rod.
Mm.
Always, I don't even know what my spark plug socket is.
It's in the bucket. It's got to be.
No.
You packed it. 5/8.
Huh?
5/8. You packed it.
I know, but it's not in there.
Oh my God.
I took everything out of the bucket right here. The bucket's right here empty.
You want to check the bag?
So, I'll go by it just verbally. The spark plug has a little thing. There are spark plugs that don't, but 99% of your spark plugs have a little, all stock spark plugs have a little thing that sticks out like this, and inside there's a cone that comes up like that. That's your gapping. Okay? iridium and platinum spark plugs have a special coating, especially on that little tip that comes up on that cone, that you can damage when you gap them. Okay? Careful, you don't want to gap it by sliding in and out, forcing it. Okay, by an expansion gap, you know, the coin ones. You don't want to force it in there to expand it. To expand it, you want to just sort of twist side to side, sort of wobble it out to get that. Otherwise, you'll damage that coating and you'll ruin your plug performance. Plugs can get cracks and lose continuity, and you might look fine, and you can be losing a lot of spark. There's spark plug testers. They have an adjustable screw on them, and you stick where your plug would be onto the coil, and you can adjust it to where it's supposed to be, whether it's electronic or standard, and you can check the distance of the gap, see if it's proper and how strong it is. I prefer that rather than checking the gap like the old style, holding spark plug against metal, you know, against the ground, because you can actually compare them and get an exact. But they all have to have the exact gap, and you're not going to get better performance by going a bigger gap or a smaller gap. That's not going to do it. And spark plugs rarely need to be changed. You change them when they are burnt looking, where that cone isn't white anymore, or the metal tip is gone or eaten away in any way. It should have a nice squared end on that tip, nice squared off end. It shouldn't be rounded. It shouldn't look like my finger. It should be like a square. You don't force them in. Okay, there's two different types of plugs. One has what looks like a washer, and there's one that doesn't. The one that doesn't, you torque that in to the specs, and this is aluminum, so every bolt in here is going to be inch-pounds torque, not foot-pounds. Okay? Because you try to torque this to 35 foot-pounds, you're going to strip it. Okay? And then you got to helicoil it to replace the threads and stuff, because you got to use the original size bolts for most everything on it. You can't go a bigger bolt for most of them. On the other ones, they have a washer that gets crushed. It's called a crush washer on it, and you torque them down. Once you do that, that crush washer's been crushed. Okay, so you're not going to get the same seal every time after that if you pull it out. So I usually only pull one out no matter what, and I'll usually judge them unless I have a way it's running weird. You know, I'll judge them off that one I pulled. Same with the sinks, I'll pull one, and if it's shitty looking, I'll change them all. You know, and plugs aren't that much either. You know, 4 plugs, you can get the iridium ones are expensive. You know, $10, $12. You know, each instead of $3 or $4, but they're really good plugs. It's expensive motors, so take care of them. Get the best oils. Run full synthetics. Don't change. Try not to change your brands or your weights of oils. Always use the exact weight for the engine. Don't ever change your weight. The only time you change your weight is when the manufacturer or dealer tells you to, because you live in Alaska or something, okay, or you live in the desert. Don't change your weights otherwise. Okay, and so I think that's pretty much it. Deteriorating fuel line. If your fuel line looks cracked, change it. The lining inside of the fuel line, when it gets that condition, can actually start breaking off and getting into your carburation or your fuel injection system. You don't want that at all. Fuel tanks can be contaminated or corroded, especially aluminum tanks. Aluminum tanks are notorious for giving you heck through your carburetors because it's all the galling. It turns like a white powder. Overall, look at the whole boat, see what you can find, any problems or anything. Look over the electrical. I usually take my meter and put it on continuity, and it'll beep when I have continuity. I touch 2 metal things, they're on the same metal, it'll beep like that. Great way to take those probes is to check your fuses, your little plastic ones, or even your glass ones, if you have those. You just touch it. If that beeps, you know that fuse is good. You touch each little side thing. You'll see on the top there's little metal, like a little tiny square. And you touch that and go deep. You know that fuse is good. You don't have to pull it out, look at it, and you can go through all the fuses real quick. Relays, if you have relays, there's a lot of times your relays are the exact same part number, each relay. So if you're having a problem, start, fuel pump, some weird thing, you can have, sometimes there'll be an extra relay. If there isn't, switch one of those relays that have the same part number and see if you still have the same problem. And that could lead you to know whether it's a relay or not. One of the great things to do is always have starter fluid, because you don't want to wear out your starter or battery on open ocean or open water. So those are good things to have. Don't worry about using starter fluid. It's fuel. One of the other things it's good for is diagnostics. So if I have all my stuff on, I know I got power, everything, I'm cranking it, and I hit it with starter fluid. If it starts and runs with starter fluid, and then when you stop, it dies, I'm going, if it keeps running, and then if I stop and it dies, I know I have a fuel pump problem. Okay? A fuel supply or fuel pump problem. Okay, one or the other. If I hit it with starter fluid, no matter what, it won't start, pretty much I have an electrical problem. That means I'm not getting spark, probably ignition problem, coil, whatever. Okay? Stator, real important not to get this part of the engine wet up here with water. A lot of times people hose down their engines and the top cowling where it breathes, they'll get too much water up in here and they'll ruin their stator. That's the electrical windings up in here. And then you basically got a very expensive problem to fix. Okay, I think that's it. Alright. You guys can send me any kind of questions you want. My name's Eric. I'm the boat guy up here in Bellevue, Seattle area. Been here for a long time. I always like to answer questions. I do detail work. I work on all engines from 1 horsepower to a couple thousand horsepower. Don't matter. Cars, all kinds of stuff, whatever. Everything's pretty much the same. Don't be nervous. Porsche engine's the same as a bicycle engine, pretty much. Ain't nothing different. Love the electrical motors. That's the way of the future, and I love that torque. They're the same as they always been too. Yeah, they went brushless, but still pretty much the same stuff. So don't get intimidated by all the extra stuff, and because it's not really that much, And once you learn how to test sensors and stuff, you pretty much beat everything. And that's not hard. You just ohm them out to the specs. You'll have a certain ohm ratio, but that's not all it's guaranteed. Still, but it can give you an idea. I think that's about it. So, nice to talk to y'all. Happy boating. Have a good season. If you're going out, you're laying up for the winter, have a good time. Out.